Hello, and welcome to Text Appeal. I am your host, Travis Villalpando. I am extremely happy to be back in Alamosa so I can get back to making more content revolving academic concepts. The beginning of this creative journey has already been quite fulfilling, but I know there is so much more in store, and I like the idea that this channel acts as a sort of digital diary for myself. With that being said, before I begin diving into the topic of personality psychology, here's a little bit of encouragement to go and make something for yourself. Go out and create something that expresses some part of your personality, that captures your interest, because you never know who else might enjoy it. Also, do not be inhibited by the audience that is yet to even exist. Do things because you know that they are good for you, and even better, is because you know that they might also be good for other people too. Do not confuse good for you as simply something you enjoy, because we all know far too well that damaging our livers, lungs, and social relationships can feel pretty damn good. That is, until the hangover kicks in, right? What I mean is, take the time to think about how good creating this hypothetical project would be for you, and when you come to a reasonable conclusion about the virtue of this effort, then by all means, go for it. And don't even ask for permission, just do it. I want to practice what I preach here, and trust me, I have been doing just that. I've been waking up feeling as if every day is an opportunity to learn something, to create something, and most importantly, to interact with people in a way that hopefully benefits the both of us. All right, now enough of my spiel for the day. I think it is time to learn about the Big 5 trait model of personality as promised, and how learning about your own personality can really benefit you in a lot of important ways. So here is the Big 5 trait model of personality. The acronym OCEAN, or canoe, is going to become quite familiar to you during this episode. I prefer OCEAN myself, so that's what we're going to go with. OCEAN stands for the terms openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. I am going to detail what each of these terms mean, but before that, I want to take a moment to help you understand how this model was created. The Big 5 dimensional trait theory is created by using what is called factor analysis. Now, factor analysis is a technique in statistics whereby we analyze observable variables in hopes that the correlations between these variables reveal an unobservable variable, or what we might call a latent variable. The unobserved variable is revealed once we notice a pattern within the observed variables. So, in personality psychology, we can observe a whole bunch of personality traits in many different people, and then we can identify correlations between such variables. For example, extroversion is characterized by a number of separate personality traits, such as sociability, assertiveness, positive emotionality, activity levels, and excitement seeking. The reason that extroversion emerges as one of the Big 5 traits is because many traits, such as the ones I just ran through, cluster up in people's personality. So, using this logic, we can now see why and how we have the acronym OCEAN to explain the model. It is now important to explain that we can take the opposite definition of each of these terms and then use that as the opposite pole for the upper and lower limits upon a personality spectrum. Here I will define each of these dimensions, and I will also briefly mention the opposite pole of each trait. So now I'm going to run through all 5 of the terms that make up OCEAN and give a little bit of detail about what it would mean to have a personality high in each of these traits. Number 1, we have openness. Now, openness is often considered the creativity dimension. Open people are open to trying new things, meeting new people, and going new places. People who score high in this dimension are going to be curious and willing to let go of their prior ideas about the world in the name of learning something new. The open person is happy to seek out diverse experiences, and somebody low in openness is going to be strict with routines and will not seek out that which is not familiar. Open people are often introspective and intellectually curious. High openness also correlates with well-being and positive relationships because open people have the ability to be open to negotiations and compromise. Where openness can go too far, though, is when a complete lack of routine is established, and open people may have the tendency to want to tear down useful traditions, which can end horribly if not careful. It is probably important to note that open people are psychologically liberal, always questioning norms and authority. I am indeed very high in openness myself, which probably explains how I am able to read the Bible, Stoic philosophy, and books on evolutionary theory all in the same hour. Open people crave new knowledge. Number 2, we have a really important trait here. All of them are, of course, important, but I think that this one stands out as something that I think all of us need to find a balance with, as well as maybe agreeableness as I get there. But the next trait is going to be conscientiousness. Now, conscientiousness refers to the trait of being responsible, organized, and diligent. People high in this trait thrive on routine, predictability, and generally can be trusted to do what they say they were going to do. Main factors of this trait are competence, orderliness, dutifulness, and achievement orientation. These people are also often called disciplined and deliberate in the way in which they go about their life. This trait is super important to be aware of because conscientiousness or high conscientiousness correlates with success in work and long-term relationships. The classic CEO or leader is generally going to be pretty high in this trait, and they will surely be productive in time management and productivity in general. Be careful, though, for a radically conscientious person may lack openness, and the classic tyrant possesses this trait as well. I can assure you that Hitler, as the quintessential dictator, was certainly hyper-conscientious. None of these traits come without a dangerous element, nor should any trait be viewed as better or worse than another. However, if you find your life to lack routine, purpose, and you fear you may be seen as unreliable, then I recommend researching how to become more conscientious. Next, we have a trait that should be pretty familiar to everybody, extroversion. Now, extroverted people are the social butterflies that we all can easily identify for the most part. This trait is defined by a person's tendency to seek out social interaction, and these types of people even become more energized by being around others and engaging in high stimulus environments. The main facets of extroversion are being friendly, affectionate, and gregarious, meaning they enjoy the company of many other people. That's what gregariousness is characterized by. It is good to note that being extroverted does not necessarily mean you are actually friendly or interested in others, but an extrovert is certainly a people person nonetheless. So if that's a little bit confusing, just think about the classic narcissistic personality. They're obviously going to be quite high in extroversion because they want to be around other people. So the friendliness that characterizes extroversion can be a little bit deceiving here because I think that having a genuine friendship is a little bit different than just wanting to be around people and charming people and persuading people. But also, persuading people is not always a bad thing. You know, there's a duality here at play. So next, to keep on with these extroverts, extroverts are often assertive, confident, and sometimes even quite forceful in expressing themselves and their opinions. So extroverts tend to tell you how it is and tell you what they think. They seek excitement and are generally happy people. Of course, everyone has a bit harder of a story when we take off our social masks that we wear, but extroverts generally appear happier than their introverted counterparts. This is probably because they get a lot of positive emotion and energy from being around others, while introverts can become a little bit lonely. Being extroverted may lead to the development of a more narcissistic personality, as the extrovert loves the attention. And that is really the difference between extroversion and introversion. The introvert prefers to be out of the public eye when possible. Next trait, number 4, we have what is called agreeableness. So now agreeableness is another one that I think everybody needs to find that sort of balance with. I think that having a fair amount of conscientiousness and agreeableness, and being able to kind of be flexible in those traits when certain situations call that forth is really, really important. So I just want to emphasize that. This trait is interesting because it is easy to see agreeable people as generally more kind, compassionate, and empathetic. But this trait is not all virtues, as none of them are, of course. Each personality could not be judged as good or bad in any simple binary way. These things are quite complex, after all. Agreeableness is characterized by sympathy, empathy, consideration, and the ability to cooperate with others. Agreeable people are generally trusting, altruistic, modest, and very compliant, meaning they don't really question authority, and this can be quite a problem for hyper-agreeable people. These types tend to avoid conflict, and they usually end up in healthcare or education as they are at their best in the service of others. People really low in this trait are those people that will argue about absolutely everything, and disagreeable types are rarely okay with just going with the flow, especially if they disagree with the direction that things are flowing. So yes, being hyper agreeable, you can kind of become taken advantage of because you're maybe, to put it in a kind of ugly word, you're kind of a yes man or a yes woman. You're not really going to stand up for yourself and what you truly believe. You just want to avoid conflict at all cost. And that might seem really virtuous and good, but it can actually end up where we see people that are terribly passive aggressive because they never stand up for themselves and say what they really think. And so agreeableness is a super interesting trait, and it just shows how there isn't a particular virtue or sin associated with agreeableness. Everybody lands on this spectrum somewhere, and it's important to figure out where you are and, to evaluate your life using this framework. Okay, lastly, number 5, we have neuroticism. Now, neuroticism is another really interesting dimension because it just refers to all types of negative emotion categorized by one term. So highly neurotic people are sensitive to negative emotion and are more prone to anxiety, depression, and being irritable all the time. These people perceive the world as a place of danger and threat. They are characterized by anxiety, hostility, depression, self-consciousness, impulsivity, and feelings of vulnerability. People low in this trait are stable in their emotions and are what we might look at as like the stoic type of people. This trait may seem all bad on the surface, but as I said, each of these traits have their ups and downs. So now, I want to talk about some personality types that have been identified as general patterns. Of course, each individual has a unique cocktail and lands somewhere on each of these traits on that spectrum, and this model does not capture all aspects of personality, but it still does quite a good job of quantifying general types that you will surely encounter all the time. Number 1, we have the resilient type. Resilient people are going to be most importantly low in neuroticism, high in conscientiousness, and are generally high in extroversion while being moderately high in the other two traits. But really, people who lack neuroticism can be deemed resilient, as they don't fall apart when things go wrong. Number 2, we have the over-control type, or as I like to call it, the tyrant personality. This is somebody who's a micromanager, really just loves control, loves to be in power, loves to make all the decisions, and is kind of a control freak. These types are extremely high in conscientiousness and are also generally high in neuroticism. They tend to be fairly low in openness, and this makes sense because being highly conscientious means you really like routine, schedule, and this really just logically adds up. Now, I want to mention that people have unique personalities. Somebody could be extremely high in openness and conscientiousness. It's just that the way in which their life kind of unfolds based on their particular personality chemistry is unique to them. But these are just some general types of personalities you'll run into. These tyrant types are also disagreeable because they like things to go the way they planned for them to go. Now, some people are just fairly controlling and are not full-blown tyrants, but a real psychopathic control freak is going to have this type of personality with conscientiousness and neuroticism turned up to the maximum. Number 3, we have the agreeable type. I'm pretty sure you can guess which trait they're high in here. The agreeable type is extremely high in agreeableness, and they rarely go against the grain. They are moderate in extroversion, openness, and conscientiousness. This is likely because they really are subject to other people's plans, and so they don't stick out in any of the other traits because they generally agree with someone else or the group. One of the faults of this personality is that the agreeable type can be taken advantage of. So if you feel like you are overly agreeable, you have got to start telling people no and working on standing up for yourself. Of course, agreeableness is not all bad because sometimes we can definitely cooperate better with others, and being a super disagreeable type is something that really we don't want to be, as far as I can tell. We don't want to be hyper disagreeable. Now, we want to be able to stand up for ourselves, but there's a fine line. And I think many people would really benefit from finding a balance with this trait in particular. Lastly, we have the open-minded type, which I'm kind of biased to talk about this type because this is where I score on the Big Five test, as evidenced by a couple tests I've taken. The open-minded type is very high in openness and is moderately high in extroversion. I imagine that someone open to new ideas and experiences is going to be interested in new people as well. These types are moderate in conscientiousness and agreeableness and are usually lower in neuroticism. The defining feature here really is their willingness to try new things and the desire to gain new knowledge. There are many other types. These ones are just the ones that I found to be most consistently recognized by a couple different sources. So if you're interested in where you fall, you should definitely take some type of test to see where you are on the Big Five. If anyone is curious, I mostly relate, as I mentioned just a little bit ago, to the open-minded type, although I would say I am definitely moderate or even moderately high in neuroticism. I can become worked up about things. I see the negative what-ifs more naturally, and it has taken a tremendous amount of work for me to become more emotionally stable. In my adolescence, I threw tantrums, and I was no stranger to being quite angry all the time. But thankfully, with maturity and understanding that I am higher in this trait, I've been able to work on it consciously, which really does mean the world to me. So thank God for these models in psychology. This is super helpful to me, so it feels right to share with as many people as I can. I am moderate in conscientiousness, as every day is generally the same, but I'm certainly flexible in my schedule. And I think this has much to do with my extremely high openness. I am fairly agreeable, which is good and bad in my estimation because disagreeable types do tend to pick on agreeable people, and I have definitely been the target of such types at different times throughout my life. Being agreeable, though, also works out in my favor quite a lot because cooperation is very necessary in collaborating with teammates, friends, professors, and family, which is something I highly prioritize. So yes, once again, I want to beat this drum. You want to find a balance with that agreeableness. You want to understand that it's okay to tell people no. It's okay to have things your way. And, we might even use the word selfish. It's okay to be selfish for good reason, right? And I know that we don't want to manipulate that too much so that we can kind of become a little bit deceitful. What we mean by, I'm being selfish, but it's for the greater good of myself and others. Selfishness is selfishness, regardless of how you spin it. But there is a real balance at play with agreeableness. Now, each of these traits has potential to manifest something impressive, right? And no particular personality equals success per se, especially depending on how you define success in your own life. However, if it is your goal to become higher in socioeconomic status, I recommend working on your conscientiousness and being less agreeable. Also, extroversion is going to open the world up to you because, of course, networking is how we expand ourselves socially. But if you have different goals, such as just living a peaceful life, or you want to help others right where you're at, I recommend becoming a little bit more open and agreeable if you lack in these areas. The point is, you are somewhere on each of these dimensions, and figuring yourself out will definitely lead to a deeper understanding of your own potential in certain domains. People are much easier to forgive when you realize they really are just a primate with heightened self-awareness and a tendency to think that they have it all figured out. The truth is, in the grand scheme of things, we are all quite uninformed about human nature. So I recommend getting a start on figuring out yourself and others. Lastly, I just wanted to note kind of the way that I view the Big Five trait personality. As far as I understand it, as being a psychology student and being interested in these types of things, personality is quite stable across the lifetime. So you're kind of dealt a particular hand, and then a lot of times we say, well, I'm dealt this hand, but how am I going to play the cards? And that works, that metaphor works okay, but it is okay to learn what personality you have, what traits are you especially high in and especially low in, and you can certainly do things in your life to increase or decrease where you're at on these spectrums, but it's also a very good thing, and this comes directly from the acclaimed and one of the greatest authors of all time, Robert Greene, in his book Mastery. He talks about finding your own unique sense of purpose, and it has a lot to do with the type of personality you have. So, for example, me, I love words, I love images, kind of my aesthetics. Of course, I tend to go towards this Judeo-Christian and evolutionary stuff, and I kind of fuse them together to try to understand what it all means. And so I like to express that interest through speaking, through conversations, through podcasting, through making these YouTube videos. And so I'm kind of figuring out, I'm going with the flow here with my natural tendency to be really high in openness. And so I'm taking advantage of my own nature. And then, of course, I could be a little bit disorganized maybe, or, think about the traits that you might lack in. Maybe I'm being a little overly agreeable. Well, then you start to stand up for yourself. And sorry, there seems to be a chopper in the background there. So you begin to stand up for yourself. And I think that's really important, to develop the opposite ends of the spectrum that you're lacking in, because you want to be capable of many things. And that's really the difference between being a jack of all trades or a master of one. Because like I said, any of these traits, being really high in them, can manifest something impressive. Like people who are crazy agreeable, like super agreeable, well, maybe they're pacifists, and maybe they're just like, I'm avoiding conflict at all costs, and they won't agree with people who are trying to make them change in that domain. So yeah, each of these traits has amazing potential, and it's important to understand your own little concoction for your personality so you can leverage it in the world. Yeah, sorry about that chopper in the background. I don't know. Thank you for listening to this episode of Text Appeal, Lessons on the Body, Mind, and Beyond.